Welcome to Healing Conversations. I'm Kesha. If you've been listening from the beginning of the season, we've been peeling back layers together. In the first episode, we talked about what it feels like to become disconnected from yourself. In the second, we explored survival mode and how the strategies that help get us through difficult situations can quietly become the way we live. Last week, we talked about the weight of being the strong one. How sometimes our greatest gifts slowly become identities we never intended to carry. Today, I want to tell you about something that's been happening in both my therapy and coaching sessions lately. I'm not remembering new things, I'm seeing the old things differently. And I've realized that might be one of the most surprising parts of healing. It isn't always about uncovering something hidden. Sometimes it's about finally recognizing a pattern that's been right in front of you all along. Recently, I've been looking back at the relationships in my life, not just my marriage, but also my friendships, professional relationships, family dynamics, even small everyday interactions. And I wasn't looking for proof that anyone was good or bad. I was just paying attention, looking for patterns. For a long time, I thought I had a boundary problem. I thought I wasn't clear enough, assertive enough, consistent enough. If someone pushed back when I said no, I assumed I had explained myself poorly. So I would explain again. And then again, I'd soften my tone. I'd add more context. I'd try to make my boundary easier to accept. And sometimes I would give up and drop the boundary altogether. Because somewhere along the way, I learned that if someone was upset with me, it was probably my responsibility to fix it. But something unexpected happened. As I started setting healthier boundaries in other relationships, I noticed something. Healthy people don't need a presentation. They didn't need a 10-minute explanation. They didn't require me to defend my needs. Sometimes they asked questions. Sometimes they were disappointed. Sometimes they didn't fully understand, but they adjusted. They respected the boundary even when it wasn't their preference. And I remember sitting with that realization and thinking, oh, maybe the boundary was never the problem. For a long time, I believed boundaries created conflict. Now, I think they reveal it. They don't create respect. They reveal whether respect was already there. They don't create safety. They reveal whether safety already existed. That realization changed something in me. Because for years, I looked at one relationship in isolation. I asked questions like, why couldn't I get this right? What am I doing wrong? How can I communicate better? But healing invited a different question. What happens when I compare this relationship to others in my life? That comparison was incredibly clarifying. Not every relationship responded the same way. Not everyone became defensive. Not everyone questioned my memory. Not everyone made me feel guilty for having needs. And suddenly, what I had accepted as normal relationship conflict no longer looked normal. One of the hardest parts of healing has been accepting that I didn't miss the pattern. I normalized it. And that's different. People sometimes ask, how did I miss the red flags? And I understand why they ask that. Looking back, some things seem very obvious. But when a pattern unfolds slowly, when it becomes your normal, you don't experience it as a series of red flags. You experience it as life. Healing hasn't made me more suspicious. It's made me more discerning. I've stopped asking, how do I get everyone to understand me? And I've started asking, what does this person's response teach me about the relationship? And that's a much different question. A much more honest question. Maybe there's a relationship in your life that leaves you feeling like you're always explaining yourself. always justifying your needs, always wondering if you're asking for too much. Maybe there isn't. Maybe your story looks completely different than mine. But here's what I'd invite you to notice this week. Pay attention to what happens after you express a need. Not because you're looking for reasons to leave, not because you're trying to label anyone, just because information matters. Notice who becomes curious. Notice who becomes defensive. Notice where you feel calmer after telling the truth. And notice where you leave the conversation feeling smaller than when you entered it. You don't have to draw conclusions today. Sometimes healing begins with nothing more than paying attention. So today, I want to leave you with a question. Has there ever been a moment when you realized you weren't seeing just one relationship differently? You were seeing yourself differently? Maybe you've spent years believing you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. Maybe you've spent years explaining yourself, softening yourself, or questioning your own instincts because someone else's reaction felt more important than your own experience. Or maybe you've recently had one of those quiet moments where something that used to feel normal suddenly didn't anymore. If so, I wonder, what new evidence are you being invited to trust? Not the evidence that comes from fear, not the evidence that comes from old survival strategies, the evidence that's right in front of you right now. The people who respect your boundaries without making you earn that respect. The relationships where you don't leave feeling confused. The moments where your body feels a little more settled after telling the truth. Healing doesn't always begin where we learn something new. Sometimes it begins when we finally trust what we've been seeing all along. One of the things I'm learning is that healing doesn't always give us new memories. Sometimes it gives us a new way of understanding the memories we already have. It gives us language, perspective, discernment. And with that comes something I didn't realize I'd been searching for. Not certainty, peace. Thank you for spending this time with me. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to continue the journey with me. You can subscribe to Healing Conversations wherever you're listening, or join me on Substack, where I share reflections, journal prompts, and conversations that go a little deeper than what we can fit into each episode. And if today's conversation brought something into focus with you, I've created a free guide called the Self-Trust Reset. It's a gentle 7-day practice to help you reconnect with your own voice and begin rebuilding trust with yourself, one small step at a time. You'll find the link in the show notes. If you know someone who might need this conversation today, I hope you'll share it with them. Sometimes the words we need find us through someone who simply thought of us. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. Trust what you're beginning to notice. And remember, coming home to yourself isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've been all along. I'm Kesha, and this is Healing Conversations.